Hello, world. That's Laurie. I'm Phil. This is the NFL Brekkie Show. Laws, we have 272 NFL games down, 272 regular season games down. I think we were doing the maths yesterday as we chatted about this show. 13 to go. That's it. It's less than a typical NFL Sunday by me, Monday by you. But everything from here on out, an elimination game, all culminating on the second Sunday from New Orleans, American time, Monday by you, watching on ESPN as you will, Super Bowl Monday, all culminating with the champion crowned. Here on out, man, playoff time. And I think we have reached our playoff stride, at least in the analysis portion of our humble weekly show here.
That was quick to jump there. Like, if we want to start throwing jabs, I know it's a testy time of year. I know your competitive juices are up because the Broncos are in the dance. They got a ticket to the prom, or the formal, as we call it in Australia. I know you're feeling the goosebumps are tingling, but we don't need to fire those jabs just yet. There's going to be plenty of time throughout the show to, maybe take a look at some of the erroneous picks that may have been made over the past month or two or three. Anyway, regardless, it is that time. Look, I've got the festive shirt on, but it is poignant. There's a reason I've got the festive shirt on. It is playoff time. It's time to be excited. Perhaps you're excited that your team has finally put their regular season to bed and they are going to enjoy a nice holiday. Maybe they're on a beach sipping. I'm not gonna lie.
And
I'm a simple
three.
man. Frozen pina coladas is what I'd be sipping on the holiday. But also, it's a double-edged sword. I have the black T-shirt underneath, Black Monday, as it's sometimes called in the NFL. But obviously, coaches, we have half a dozen openings in the NFL right now in the head coaching offices, with Antonio Pierce, the most recent one, the Las Vegas Raiders, choosing to move on. And I think we have one big decision looming there in North Texas that we might touch on a little bit later. But we're at that point of the season where teams really are going divergent ways. And that sums up this season, really, because it is one of the great disparity campaigns, the 2024 regular season. This was the haves and the have-nots. There's a reason why if you had something like 5 wins total last year, you were close to a top 5 pick. If you had 5 wins this year, you might not even have a top 10 pick.
Yeah.
That's what we're dealing with. This is a season where the cream has separated themselves. And there's been more struggling franchise than perhaps we're used to. But we're going to start this thing off looking at Wildcard Weekend, which is one of the most fun weekends. We mentioned there's only a dozen or so football games left in this season as we get to the playoffs. But Wildcard Weekend is a festival of football. It's a beautiful time to dive into some of the finest product of NFL action that we get this season. But there's also a time when we have curious home underdogs. We have seeding that doesn't quite match up. So you and me are going to kind of look at these dark horses that may emerge from Wildcard Weekend and take a gander at who might be someone that is not respected by the markets, the pundits, whatever that might be, the public, the fans, and might be raring to make a little bit of a dash through this January run at least.
Yeah, Laz, and I mean, as is true to the wild card form, and every time I hear wild card, there's just a part of me that hears Charlie Day from It's Always Sunny, wild card, expletive. And just this is when again, we have 17 games of sample size, and not every bit of sample is equal, right? If teams resting starters toward the end of the season, maybe a player was hurt for the first couple weeks, or a young quarterback found his form about week 6, hypothetically speaking. But we kind of know who these teams are to this point. But cliches are cliches because there's a lot of truth in them. This is a new season. And there are certain players historically who have elevated their forms once the temperatures drop here in America, northern winter, and the stakes rise with playoff football, and others who fade away. And it's why Tom Brady and Joe Montana are legends, and other quarterbacks who had comparable numbers aren't, because they didn't excel at this time of year. So initially, when you and I chatted, you love a good draft.
I do.
And so kind of, again, a new year, new me, not picking on you if prognostication is it hasn't been your strength in recent weeks. We run out of form, and you're 1, 2, 3 Cancun with popular demand. But I said, hey, why don't we do something that's up Laz's alley? The picks, the draft order. So why don't we draft upsets we like this weekend? By the way, all 6 games on ESPN from, I'll do Sydney, Melbourne time, because you guys have a lot of time zones over there. 8:30 a.m. Sydney, Melbourne time. Sunday, that's the Texans spot every wild card game they've ever played has been in that spot. All the way through Tuesday morning, I'll be on the field at SoFi Stadium for Rams Vikings. Very excited about that. So we have 6 games there, all on ESPN. Why don't you and I pick the likelihood of upsets? We'll draft our dark horses to upset things in the first round. And we said, all right, we'll just label an upset by seed. So that means a road team winning. Well, as we sat here 5 minutes to go, I'm chowing down on a sandwich. I thought, and I pitched to you, I'm like, wouldn't it be more compelling if, and I think at that point we both agreed, the 2 likeliest road upsets would be the 4-5 games because both road teams, according to sports books, are favorites. I said, why don't we remove that and we just go by the book, favorite underdog. We're not talking numbers. We're talking who's going to win the game, but use their definition of upset. And there's like, oh, that's harder. And I thought that's better content and better discussion. And you agreed. So since I upset the apple cart, since I can't think of another idiomatic expression for that, since I screwed things up, would you like to lead off or would you like me to lead off here?
No, you didn't screw things up, Phil. You pivoted, and that's important in this day of agile, flexible digital content in the sports media world. You need to be able to pivot. Pivot foot, Ross Geller, shout out. Pivot. So pivot. I appreciate that. It's all about the engagement. It's all about making content that fans and our friends, our viewers,
we don't have fans here. We're
at the Brekkie Show that they're going to engage with. So you know what? I'm not going to punish you or hold a grudge because you created some last minute chaos. I'm going to credit you for your thinking, and you, sir, may have the first pick.
Okay, well, this is easy for me. And I will say, had we just gone by seeding, I couldn't have picked the Chargers to win in Houston fast enough.
Yeah.
Because I have no faith in the Texans, and I have so much more faith in Jim Harbaugh and that team's run of form in recent weeks. But I'll go with the Rams beating the Vikings as my likeliest book upset. And that's simply because we saw this happen in week 8. The Rams went into Minnesota, beat the Vikings 30-20. Yes, there was a controversial, I'll call it controversial. It was a missed call. Should have been a face mask against the Rams on Sam Darnold late in that game, but it didn't make a 10-point difference. The Rams are the superior team. And remember, for so much of the early part of the season, they were missing parts, Cooper Kupp and or Puka Nacua. There is reason to like Minnesota in this game. Their defense is terrific. In the old adage in the NFL, defense travels. The Rams are bereft of a home field advantage. They're slow starters. Sam Darnold, so good at deep passes. You look at his numbers, 20-plus air yards. I had a whole case for them here and why I would want to pick Minnesota. Leads the NFL in QBR, completion percentage, completions, tied for the lead in touchdowns on 20-plus air yards. And the Rams are 5th from bottom in completions allowed on 20-plus air yards. But in the strength versus strength of the Rams play-action game, they've been very reliant on Kyren Williams in terms of touches and carries in recent weeks against the Vikings, who are very adept against play-action games. I'll go with the guy who has more pass yards per game ever than anybody ever in the postseason in Matt Stafford to find a way, lean on his experience. Puka Nacua has been playing out of his mind, whether or not that frees things up for Cooper Kupp or somebody else in their deep core of wide receivers. I'll take the Rams to win, maybe not by the 10 points they did the first time around, but I think that is the likeliest upset of the first round.
I think it makes a lot of sense. It's the pick that would have come off the board for me first. I'm kind of happy I didn't have to do that because there's just an emotional tie I have to the Minnesota Vikings and Sam Darnold, the Peacock, the rejuvenated one, that I didn't want to have to, pick against or throw bad juju against, despite being clearly outclassed and particularly when it comes to Darnold, harassed and harried in the pocket against Detroit Lions in Week 18 in a big spot. So before we carry on, I just want to know, are we going to go snake here? Or are we just going to go alternate pick because it's only 6 picks?
I think we just alternate.
I think that's a wise decision. And just looking how my board sets up, I don't actually love how that's going to play out with how some of these things are going. Look, I might go with we're talking upsets here, right? We're talking by the markets, by the pundits, by what's being talked out there. We're talking about upsets and teams that aren't favored. And maybe I'm going to go in a different direction here because I think a lot of people might have a look at a 4-5 game at this point. And that's not what I'm going to do here. I'm going to take a look at the Green Bay Packers, and they're going to come off the board for me. I know they're not as narrow a market as, say, I believe the Washington Commanders and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, but I was having a look offensively in particular at some of the passing numbers and how Jordan Love and how Jalen Hurts are playing, particularly over the last 5 or 6 weeks. I discounted Week 18 for obvious reasons. Love exited that game. And obviously we saw the Philadelphia Eagles were rolling out a cavalcade of interesting quarterback names there. And we expect Jalen Hurts to progress through the concussion protocol. Hasn't been able to as of yesterday because they didn't actually practice. That's part of the concussion protocol and moving through that program. And Jordan Love, pretty strong affirmation that even though he had picked up an elbow knock and some numbness in his throwing hand, he said straight up yes in terms of his likelihood to be out there in Wildcard Weekend. So Christian Watson out, it's a big headline there for the Green Bay Packers. But what they're doing, very comparable versus under pressure versus the blitz, overall passing success rate, really similar quality seasons. I think in different ways, Jordan Love has certainly been. It's the Toyota-thon. We're not handing out free sponsorships here, but that's the meme that's going around. He picks up steam when that in that back half of the season after that noted American automobile marketing campaign kicks in over there. And he's credit to him. He's lent into it, and there's done some collaborations there. But so perhaps a little more of a change in production and trajectory for Love as this season went on. Whereas Jalen Hurts, it's kind of been quite measured and consistent throughout. I don't think it's been overly explosive through the year. It hasn't been the story. Saquon Barkley's been the story in terms of MVP consideration. But I see these two teams. We saw the belter that they played in week one to open this thing off in Brazil to launch the season down at Bondi Pavilion. Watching that one, it was fantastic. But I think defensively, these two teams match up quite similarly. I think I had a quick look because, as I mentioned, Watson being out, it does raise some concern. So just looking at the production of Jordan Love in games over the last couple of seasons when he has been without Christian Watson. And we got 3 picks there, Phil.
It's not bad.
Sorry?
It's not bad. His production isn't bad without Watson.
His production is not bad. We're talking about 3 picks in a dozen or so games, and the touchdowns far outweigh that. Would you like some quick math? 6, 7, 8, 10. 15. We're up to 20 touchdowns and 3 picks. It wasn't quick math. I had it written down, but I thought I'd just create a little on-air moment.
That is a Vaucluse education, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you very much. Hold on. Would you like me to put the designer frames on as I go through this? 20 touchdowns, 3 interceptions in the games without Christian Watson. Don't you like how the greenish hue of the glasses touches on the ferns on my shirt? Anyway.
Not accidental, everybody.
Green Bay. Look, we've got Kelly Green in this contest as well, but I'm leaning towards, when we're talking about upsets, as the markets say, and upsets in terms of a team that, honestly, I think if they find we know the ceiling this team has, they have the potential to knock off absolutely anyone in the division, in the conference, I should say. So I'm going to take the Green Bay Packers as my first pick there, and I think that probably leads you to a pretty obvious choice with your next one.
You would think so. I will say, my math was more just, again, we're talking wins and losses. Since Jordan Love became starter, he's 6-4 as a starter without Christian Watson, which isn't terrible. I do have concerns with how well Philly's secondary has played by and large during this win streak, and Watson's ability to take the top off of a defense and then allow some of these underneath routes to develop. Green Bay doesn't have the same caliber of deep threat without Watson. And even historically, you say, well, Jalen Hurts hasn't played in a few weeks. He has all of 4 pass attempts in the last 3 games. There have been 5 quarterbacks who have entered the wild card round with fewer than that, and they're 3-2. So I would still tip Philly here. Also, Philly's run defense has only allowed 9 rush yards per game. So even if you thought the game script might be a heavy Josh Jacobs load, I'd go back to that game in Brazil. And remember, Philly's first 2 possessions were a pick and a fumble lost on a short field, and Green Bay got all of 6 points out of it. In that game, Jalen Hurts threw 2 interceptions. He's thrown 3 since in the last however many starts he had. So he's cleaned things up. But Laz, a stat that would support your tip there, I had it lower on my board, and supports the one I'm going to make, is that if teams play in the wild card round and they played in week 1, the road teams are 4-0 in those games all the time. And Green Bay is the only 7 seed to upset a 2 since we redid the playoffs in 4 years ago. So
look at
thank
the comment
Brad.
there. Yeah. True TV professional, ability to think on fire, ability to educate you about history.
See, my producers pull their hair out when I do that in a blitz environment. But I'll say, hey, Brad says it's the mark of the hallmark of a true TV professional is thinking on the fly. Calling an audible, Jackson Dart style in the Ole Miss bowl game when he was, anyway. So Laz, I'm going to stick with this. This game is close. And I don't know if it's where you thought I would go. Maybe it is because I've been trashing the Texans. I'm going to go with the Commanders with my second pick to go to the pirate ship and beat the Bucks if we're drafting upsets, because I mean, it's Jaden Daniels and how good he is against the blitz. We know Todd Bowles loves to dial up pressure. We saw this in week 1. The Bucks won comfortably. I think it was 37-20 was the final score. Jaden Daniels didn't throw for a touchdown. Baker Mayfield threw for 4 of them. Again, Chris Godwin was in the lineup. Baker looked sharp. Both of these quarterbacks excel against the blitz, but Tampa brings pressure more often. And Baker will stretch the field more. But Jaden Daniels, I'm sorry, Baker will take the check down more quickly against the blitz. Jaden Daniels is comfortable with his receivers and built enough rapport with them to put those low percentage but high reward throws up there. And it's panned out. He's top 5 in the league in QBR against the blitz. He's top 5 in total yards. Baker has more touchdowns and slightly better completion percentage. But if the Bucks recipe is, hey, what we did in week 1, I think Daniels has evolved enough as a quarterback to counteract that. Now, the other side of it, my concern with it is how great Baker Mayfield has looked in the last 3 weeks. His last 4 games, have his 3 top QBR performances of the season, and the 4th best was against the Commanders back in week 1. Baker, he's oddly enough in the second quarter of games, he's thrown 10 of his 16 interceptions. So there's a chance that Washington could build up some momentum heading into the locker room here. I can't read my handwriting. Both of these teams are top 4 in points. So that's where I was going with that. Both these teams are top 5 in points. 4th time in the wild card era that's happened. So I do think when you have a game where you expect both teams to score, it is an avenue for an upset. The game shouldn't be shortened. It'll be elongated. And there's an avenue here for Washington to win this game 34-31, a really exciting game this weekend. So having the Rams and the Commanders, I'm happy with those as my top 2.
Yeah, I think the way this has panned out, I've made this quite comfortable for you. I haven't stressed.
I was trying to be a gentleman.
You were, and perhaps I was being too chivalrous going back the other way. Okay, so at this point, this is where it gets, because I think there's a teardrop off there. So this is where it gets uncomfortable. This isn't the team that I like the most at this spot. If we're just looking at teams in a vacuum, but the matchup plays into it. I would have this team in terms of current form in the bottom 2 of the underdogs, but they're going to come off the board here, and I think you're going to be smiling like a Cheshire cat when I say this, but I will take the Texans here. It's a closer market against the Chargers than some of these other ones. It's viewed as a tighter game than perhaps what we've got coming up with perhaps the Broncos up against the Buffalo Bills or that AFC North showdown. But look, can I tell myself a story where the Texans defense, which has been the more consistent unit this season than the offense, can put the clamps down on some elements of the LA Chargers offense? If you think of someone like Derek Stingley, if he can take away someone like a Lad McConkey, can they, if you wanted to go one-on-one, or do you put Stingley on someone like Quentin Johnston, eliminate him, and then you can bracket Lad McConkey and remove him from the picture, and turn this truly just to try and make them one-dimensional with the J.K. Dobbins-led run game there and limit Justin Herbert's ability to impact this thing? That's a story I can tell from the defensive side. It's the offense that concerns me, just the protection around CJ Stroud. The consistency of CJ Stroud himself in all different scenarios. This doesn't look like the same poised, composed, easy grace quarterback operating there. Bodies around him, no bodies around him, chucking it downfield, finding players in stride, in rhythm with accuracy. We've seen some tough spots for him. We've also seen him miss some layups, quite frankly, as the Texans almost they flew under the radar for so much of this season because the division itself was so poor in the AFC South. They were, hardly stringing together long winning streaks and just kind of sitting there up the top of their division. And then when we get closer to this, the playoffs kicking off, Wildcard Weekend, having a look at seedings and the form and casting a keener spotlight on them, it seems from the wider NFL literati and fandom, just the frustrations, the inefficiencies that are really glaring there. The questions about a name that was so hot this time last year. We're talking about coaching carousel. We're going to get into that in a sec with someone like Bobby Slowick. And then the questions about the offensive scheme that he's run out there and why this has regressed under his look. He's still he's on one of the team's shortlist. Is it the New York Jets that are bringing in Bobby Slowick, I think, for an interview on a long list, which is a little surprising given the trajectory of that unit. Look, I'm going to take the Texans here. I don't feel great about it, but I can tell myself a story where D'Amico Ryan's defensive unit makes things really tough for a Chargers team and a Chargers offense that has its strengths, but I think has its ceiling as well. And that we'd get enough good CJ Stroud in this spot where they can win a tight one, say 20-17. I don't feel great about it. But hey, look, we're down into my second to last pick here. There's a tier fall off. You're not going to feel great about a lot of the picks at this point.
Well, it's also your second pick. So second to last is a glass half empty approach, Laws. I'm with you. I think this speaks to the depth in the NFC more than anything, is that there are really three teams for whom you could make a cogent argument in the AFC that would get to a Super Bowl. The NFC, I mean, I can wrap my head around the Rams getting hot. I can certainly wrap my head around the Vikings getting there. Even Absolutely. The Packers, if they come out and move the ball, I mean, that team's they've lost to Detroit twice, but they've been close games, and their ceiling is as good as anybody on a good day. So I think in the AFC with that drop off, my concern here, and I'm not trying to convince you of anything. I mean, you made your reluctance clear. Justin Herbert has been in magnificent form in the last 3 weeks. 73.3%, over 300 yards per game, 7 touchdowns, 1 pick. 3 of his top 4 QBR games are in the last 3, a 3-game win streak for the Chargers. And he just doesn't turn the ball over. He has 3 picks all year. So the Texans' avenue would be, wow, only Minnesota has more interceptions than us. We need to force picks. Wrong quarterback against whom to do it. And both of these teams start well in this scenario. Chargers great in the first half on the road. Texans great in the first half at home. Texans are the worst second half home team in the NFL, full stop. Yep. And the Chargers are 4th best, tied for 4th best in terms of second half performance on the road. So if this game is close at the half, history of this season spells problems for the home team in Houston, that LA, with their coaching staff and their ability to just grind out wins, will find a way. So obviously I'm going to stay in the AFC, and it's clear, I think, where I'm going, despite the T-shirt I'm wearing. My final pick, rounding it out, is Denver in Buffalo. I think Denver keeps this close than the experts expect, wink, wink, but I don't see an avenue for them to get past the Bills, and namely Josh Allen. Now, the case for Denver, Bo Nix is very good against zone defense. Since week 6, he's top 5 in the NFL in passing touchdowns and completion percentage. Buffalo runs zone a lot, 68%, 5th most common in the league. So it's strength against strength there. Denver's pass blocking is very good. When Bo Nix has been sacked 1 time or fewer this season, Denver's 8-0. But if the opponent gets multiple sacks, he's 2-7. We know Von Miller's going to pin his ears back and try and make the statement against his former team, even though he showed some reluctance in a meme he posted hours ago about, I won't address the meme, but all those things point to Denver. But Denver's hallmark is an ability to pressure the opposing quarterback. They're number 2 in pass rush win rate, set a franchise record with 63 sacks. In fact, the last time they led the NFL in sacks was the last time they were in the playoffs, 2015, and they rode that pass rush to a Super Bowl and then a Super Bowl win. The problem is they're going up against a Josh Allen who is excellent under pressure. Number 1 in the NFL in QBR when pressured, tied for the most touchdowns, number 1 in yards per dropback when pressured. And Buffalo's O-line is decent. They're number 4 in pass block win rate. That's better than decent. That's good. So I think this is going to be a situation in which both quarterbacks have their moments. And Denver's game scripts early have been really good in recent weeks. They've been moving the ball up the field with not much trouble early in these games. But as it goes on and gets longer, I just think Denver's going to be frustrated with Josh Allen, as he's wont to do, pulling plays out of nothing. I do think Buffalo gets a win in a 27-20, 30-23 range. But if you're asking me to pick this one versus the other remaining game, I got to go Broncos as my last dark horse, appropriately upset pick.
That leaves the Steelers for me. They were bottom of the pile. And this has gone pretty much exactly how I thought it was going to come off the board. Almost chalk. Yeah, exactly how I had this coming off the board. The problem with the Steelers is you can't hang your hat on Russell Wilson and the offense. You see the limitations. You see the trudginess of the run game. You see the constraints through the air, frustrations of players like George Pickens. There's just simply not enough firepower on offense up against a Baltimore Ravens team that has an ascending defense. It's playing like one of the best 5 defenses in the NFL and capable against the run and the pass. And then offensively, we know what they've been doing, that Todd Monken scheme, Lamar Jackson with an MVP consideration campaign, Derrick Henry. Zay Flowers, health questions, but we're seeing this has been a quietly resurgent campaign for someone like Rashad Bateman, and Mark Andrews does nothing for the last month and a half but score touchdowns and celebrate. So it's an overmatch on paper, and people say, oh, maybe we'll get that Steelers defense that turns up. Okay, do you like traditional old school counting stats? The Steelers defense on the season whole is top 10, I think top 8th ranked in points per game. You like more advanced stats, defensive success rate, they're middle of the pack, literally right in the middle there around the 15-16 mark when it comes to defensive success rate. That's, for those that don't know, that's about how much yardage you give up towards a first down on the early downs, and then about conversions in those key third and fourth down scenarios. So that's how we measure the success rate, both offense and defense. Okay, so they were top 10 and top 15 in the traditional and then more advanced metric that I can pull out there for the whole season. Now have a look at the last month and a half. The 24th in points per game allowed. That's your old school stat. New school stat, the 26th in defensive success rate. Cool. So quite simply, over the last month and a half, we've seen that unit fall away. Yes, I know you've got TJ Watt repping there, another 11.5 sacks, outpaced by Micah Parsons, who had 12 sacks despite missing a month of the season plus. But the defensive, when it comes to defense, something that we talk about year in, year out, and it really does start to show itself at this time of year, is great defensive units when they are paired with increasingly frustrated offense. Defense is so much about being assignment-focused, assignment-sound effort, rally. Yes, it's about talent. Yes, it's about scheme. Yes, it's about being smart and football IQ. But to actually achieve that as a unit, there has to be that collaborative effort, consistent, combative competitiveness to get after the ball, react to plays, and stay focused. That becomes harder when you're constantly seeing the ball given straight back and punted away and seeing offensive inefficiency and frustration. We've heard murmurs coming out from within that defensive unit or the locker room about, hey, some hero ball being played by some players. The cracks are there. I don't have much of a case. I guess I'm supposed to be making a case for this. I don't know, how's the weather in this game?
But well, I mean, Laz, what you're making the case is that it's the least likely first-round upset.
So I'll take the Steelers, but really, I think what I've laid out here is exactly why I'm firmly taking the Baltimore Ravens in a pick'em.
Well, and Laz, I mean, two things I think that support your reluctance. So much was made about Lamar's career struggles against the Steelers, lowest QBR of any opponent, blah, blah, blah. Mm-hmm. The first time he played the Steelers at home in front of a full crowd was 4 weeks ago. He was either injured or it was the 2020 COVID year when 3,500 fans turned up in Baltimore, which is hardly a home field advantage. So you're playing a team that typically strong, above average defense, some years excellent defenses. And every time you play them, you're on the road with a deafening road environment. Of course, you're going to struggle. And I think he righted the ship. I think the greater concern for Lamar is just his own personal playoff hoodoo. We've seen his completion percentage drop, his yards per attempt drop, his touchdown interception ratio is a third of what it was. And we'll break that down, I think, in future weeks after Baltimore wins here, and in all likelihood has to go to Buffalo in the next round of the playoffs, barring Denver having my last round flyer hit. But also for the Steelers, their offense is so predicated on Russell Wilson yards per attempt, flat out. If he has 7 or more, and 7 isn't an impressive number, if he has 7 or more yards per attempt this season, in his starts, the Steelers are 4-1. When he fails to get to 7, they're 2-4. And he was under 7 in both games against Baltimore. They were just lucky that was one of the 2. So I think given the preponderance of sample size for Russell Wilson, he's going to be somebody who's going for, I mean, do the math. If you're 6.5 yards per attempt on 20 attempts, that's, I made that math very hard on me. 130 yards, 130 on 20 attempts. On 25 attempts, it's it's a little more than that. It's
not enough.
I mean, it's 150. And even though the Ravens are, weak against the deep ball, and we know typically George Pickens is something of a deep ball threat. I think maybe he gets 1 here, but man, he's not in his form, and nor is he in his right headspace. I don't see an avenue realistically that the Steelers win, barring the TJ Watt punch out, +4 turnover game. It's out there. It's just that's what it would take.
I think we're in lockstep here. Before we close this one up, a comment here that really summed it up. The NFC feels like 5 of the 7 teams I could see in the Super Bowl. We've got a little correction there. Appreciate the typo correction there from Brad. AFC, I can only see 3 teams making it, lockstep with what you said there, but it does feel a little lopsided there, a little top heavy, and I think that's why you saw such a rallying around the potential machinations and permutations that could have put a team like Cincinnati into the AFC playoffs, because it did feel so flat at the bottom of the at the bottom of the AFC playoff picture, whereas that NFC does feel a whole lot more open. Really, the fact that the number 1 seed and a division title came down to that final game of the regular season, it's kind of a flow on. It set the tone for so much of what we've got set up for us on the NFC side of things for Wildcard Weekend.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Laz, our draft concludes. I have the Rams, Commanders, Broncos. You have the Packers, Texans, Steelers.
Yeah, feel great about it.
We will revisit this in 1 week's time, as I'm fresh off of a very long travel day coming home from LA.
Boo.
Hey, better than the -9 Celsius I had in Pittsburgh on the weekend last week. Okay, Laz, time to pick up the phones.
Yeah.
Dial, as we did 40 years ago, I guess. Hot Take Hotline brought to you by Macca's. You ring in and give us your hot takes. And this week, Laz, it had something of a coaching carousel focus.
Absolutely. Look, as we mentioned, 6 openings, perhaps 1 more to come, depending if, how Jerry Jones is feeling with rumors of do they give away an Emmy or a Golden Globe for best dramatic performance under 5 minutes in length with his efforts on Landman? It went viral. Actually, honestly, we can touch on it. Like, truly quite a moving piece of acting there from Jerry Jones. Cue the comments of, oh, yeah, of course he's a great actor. He's been acting as a GM for 30 years and whatnot. But we'll leave that for the social medias. Okay, first one here, and this isn't a hot take. This is just a burning question. Out of all the moves that have happened, Doug Peterson was one of them, being let go, former Super Bowl winning head coach of the Eagles, being let go by the Jacksonville Jaguars. But Trent Baalke, the GM, much maligned GM remaining in the burning question here from at Real Scott Boyton. How has Teflon Trent Baalke kept his job? And you know what, Phil? I don't know. I think that the fact that the statement from owner Shad Khan came out saying we had built one of the best rosters, or we built the best Jags roster ever, and we didn't succeed.
Nope.
I mean, makes you wonder who's telling him that. I know, well, we're talking about NFL literati.
Yeah.
Robert Mays did post out the picture of, we'll go back to a little pop culture for you here, Phil. Lord of the Rings, Grima Wormtongue, whispering in the ears and poisoning the thoughts of the King of Edoras there, back in, that would have been Two Towers, I think. Théoden King.
We are out of my lane.
No, there we go. Look, you got to be versatile this day and age. Whispering and poisoning the ear, and that's the image that he was posting there, or presenting of Trent Baalke, because who is telling Shad Khan that this is the most impressive Jags roster that's ever been put together? I know there's been investment, but I would hardly say that they were imposing. I think the defensive line looked imposing from a size and stature standpoint, but hardly delivered that on the season. This was the free agent signings that have become questionable. It's been known, there's running gags out there that Trent Baalke is known to make a big signing, a free agent acquisition above market value for a player that dominated against the Jaguars in previous seasons. That's led me to believe, Phil, that with Trent Baalke being retained, the 2025 Trent Baalke overpay acquisition of a player who dominated against the Jags will be a day 2 pick given up for Alec Pierce of the Indianapolis Colts.
Could be.
who over 2 games this season against their division rivals had 5 targets for 5 catches for 191 yards and 2 touchdowns.
Pretty good.
So I could see, given that Michael Pittman's been paid by the Colts, given that Josh Downs has emerged as perhaps the best receiver there, could Alec Pierce in the final year of his rookie contract fetch an overpaid draft pick value from Trent Baalke? But Phil, that's just my musings. How has he remained in Jacksonville? Can you make sense of it?
Well, Laz, I preface it with this. Whenever we have these conversations, there are always people who say, how can you sit there and call for somebody to lose their job? Listen, there are a lot of reputable, respectable professions out there in the trades and all types of things where you have job security. When it comes to a position, and one that, the supply and demand is so disproportionate, it's not inaccurate to call an NFL GM a position of true prestige in both expectation and compensation. So that said, there are certainly more qualified general managers, talent evaluators out there. I'll point to one, Louis Riddick. He would do a better job in Jacksonville than has Trent Baalke. Again, Baalke took over 2021, so this is his fourth full season. The problems in Jacksonville predate him. 10 double-digit loss seasons in the last 13 years. And you go back the last 16, you counteract that with one double-digit win season in a very winnable division. The most, generally speaking, in the AFC, this is the weakest of the four divisions. And this year, it's by some margin. And the future doesn't suggest it's going to change anytime soon. Credit Shad Khan, I guess. If you work for that organization, you're thinking, man, what a generous person. Because he even said in his statement, he used some terminology that I don't quite agree with, just the severity of it. But one thing he said if we change general managers, it'd be like shooting ourselves in the foot. We'd have to replace not one job, but 85, the entire staff. Sure, but that concession, what's he saying there? It's hard to find a good GM, so we'll just stick with this guy who's proven not to be a great talent evaluator. And if we're in the same position next year, which remains, this year didn't give me warm, fuzzy feelings that Trevor Lawrence is a $55 million quarterback. I know you love him, and I know that I've seen things on tape where I'm like, this guy can be a star in the NFL. But if we get a copy-paste Trevor Lawrence performance year over year, whether that's issues running the offense or durability or both, then you're in the same spot, and inevitably you'll say, well, we need to replace the GM. Well, now you have a first-year coach who worked under a GM who didn't instill a lot of confidence in anybody. And then, assuming you get that coach and sticks around, now you have a coach who's playing under a GM who might be looking to replace the coach anyway. And this is why franchises like the Browns haven't won a division since the 80s. I know we're talking about the Jags, not the Browns, but it's not bad luck that Cleveland hasn't won a division since 1989. Yet they found a way to finish last in their division almost 20 times in that time. So the Jags are proving to not be a well-run organization. And Mr. Khan, you got the billions to do it. It's your plaything, okay. But then guys like us, not in suits today, in makeup, but T-shirts, are going to sit there and say, you are perpetuating what's been the case with this franchise for the lion's share of the last 2 decades.
He's overseen multiple failed head coach hirings. Baalke. There's been questionable draft picks.
Urban Meyer was one of the worst head coaching hirings of the last half decade in the NFL.
Last half decade, might be last half century, might be last millennium. I know the NFL doesn't go back that far, but I'm feeling a little hyperbolic. As Brad points out here, Trent Baalke took Trayvon Walker over Hutch because of the measurables. Look, I think there's an interesting clip going around from that press conference with Shad Khan where he's asked, what if the new head coach, it sounds like the head coach won't report into Baalke. It'll be more of a direct line straight to Khan. What if he wants to overhaul the football department, the football operation, the front office, general manager implied? And Khan says, well, you have to look at that. And Baalke is there on the call as well. That's a nice clean moment there. But ultimately the fear, we can get away from, our personal opinions of the football effectiveness and running a program of Baalke, but the fear going forward for the good talent on that roster, right? Trevor Lawrence and Brian Thomas Jr., et cetera, et cetera. The fear is, does holding him in here limit the willingness for the best head coaches to look at that spot? Okay, there's plenty of head coaches, especially the offensive coordinators who are getting a run, or offensive-minded head coaches, to be looking, going, Oh, Trevor Lawrence, I can work with that. Oh, Brian Thomas Jr. Have we found something, a new lead back in Tank Bigsby, etc.? There's some pieces on that offensive line that we can build around. It's not complete, but there is some talent there. But do you get held back and reluctant to actually look at that job? And we've seen head coaches do this. Head coaches will pull back from consideration for openings or head coaching candidates, hotshot coordinators, because they don't like the scenario and they don't think they're being set up.
We'll talk about this. We have openings in New England, Chicago, Jacksonville, now Vegas as of a couple hours ago, possibly potentially Dallas.
New Orleans.
And, I mean, anybody who sits around and talks football will say, well, where's the best opening? And you look at roster and draft capital and division depth. And among the chief things you look at is organizational hierarchy. It's not an asset for the Cowboys, as prestigious as that office is, that the owner / GM has been steering the team in the wrong direction. Is the pros and cons list when you have leadership that's questionable, it's an objective con. It's a reason that keeps anybody, when you and I are talking about it. So certainly those head coaches are taken into consideration, especially if they have an option to go to any of the other franchises. Carolina got lucky. Dave Canales looks like he's a very capable coach, and that's despite the influence of owner David Tepper.
All right. We have one more comment here and take. Don't want to spend too long on it because we've been bogged down in Jacksonville for a little too long. Matt Nagy to Jacksonville, because that's a Jacksonville thing to do. That's from the B League.
I'm surprised he's getting looks, man. You and I were talking about this. There are a couple names like Arthur Smith getting asked to interview. It's just guys who weren't head coaches, and then what they've done as offensive coordinators hasn't exactly instilled confidence. Like, hey, we should give him another shot, like a Nathaniel Hackett or something. So it's very surprising to me that Nagy's getting interviews as another head coach, because it didn't go well last time, and I haven't seen anything in the interim to justify it.
It didn't, mind you. I'd take more of a look at, personally, Matt Nagy than Arthur Smith. That's just if we're doing
of
either
the
or.
two, sure. But when we're talking about all the capable coordinators out there, the Ben Johnson, the Bobby Slowick, who we haven't seen before, or a Vance Joseph, who
Liam
we
Cohen
saw before, but his performance of the last 30 weeks of football has said, well, maybe this guy deserves another shot. There's a lot more out there that would,
absolutely,
for me. And then you get to guys who have experience, and Mike Vrabel.
And this is another point. This is a point you brought up before, and it's one that I can't hammer home enough. This idea, anytime someone makes the argument, oh, well, who's better that's out there? Or the other version of that you mentioned with the Jacksonville Jaguars, oh, we'd have to replace 85 people. Just because something is hard doesn't mean it's not worth doing, particularly when it's something as important as finding your next head coach. Yeah. They're not always obvious.
Winning in the NFL is hard. If you want a job that's easy, you're in the wrong business.
There's been plenty of, was Kevin O'Connell the most glaringly obvious head coaching, anointed next great one? I can't remember. I wasn't following back in the turn of the millennium. It was before my NFL fandom took over, but was Bill Belichick, with everything that happened in Cleveland, the most obvious?
or Bill Belichick, who 30 minutes before his introductory press conference with the Jets wrote on a napkin to the GM and said, hey, I'm not going to take this job. Actually, I'm going to go coach in New England.
It's not always obvious. Sean McVay, whilst the pedigree was incredible, there was so much doubt and question marks over him coming on as a 30-year-old head coach, taking over a team like the Rams. And look how that has been. Not everything is plain and obvious. And some of the most hyped up and most gold stamped coaching candidates, like Robert Saleh, don't play out that way and don't age that way. Dan Quinn was not the sexiest hire in this cycle, and he's proven to be one of the best hirings this cycle. So just because it's not obvious that there's better out there doesn't mean you don't do the work to go and find it, and you just be happy with the current status quo. Okay, moving on. While we're talking about average, this one from Danny Mack. In an average draft class, Vegas, who currently have the number 6 pick in the draft, courtesy of a couple of wins over the last month that they probably didn't need, certainly didn't impact Antonio Pierce's future with the franchise. Vegas probably have to look at a veteran quarterback, picking 6. They do have $107 million in cap space slated for 2025 at this point. Depends who's coach, but Aaron Rodgers would be a good get for them. This wasn't submitted. This was kind of in an exchange on Twitter with Danny Merritt. It wasn't submitted as a particular hot take, but that comes across as a hot take. Aaron Rodgers being a good move if he's willing to play football, to go join the increasingly Brady-influenced football operation over there in Vegas. I firmly disagree. I think a team that, this is not my type of hot sauce. I think a team that has been stuck in quarterback mediocrity for so long and has chased retreads and has chased declining veteran quarterbacks who have some starting experience since Derek Carr has left. I can't think of a quarterback room that needs to be invigorated with fresh, young, new talent, perhaps more than the Las Vegas Raiders. Now, being at pick 6 doesn't make that easy. You're going to have to look, especially with some of the QB needy teams. Tennessee played this thing like a masterful fiddle, winding up where they did. But if they can get up, if they can convince a team like the Cleveland Browns that, no, just give Deshaun Watson, who may have had a setback, reportedly had a setback in his Achilles recovery.
Not reported. I mean, the GM came out and said he had a setback.
So with that, can you get up into a higher spot? Do you need to get up? How high do you have to climb? What do you have to give up? But there needs to be, we can't be, whatever it is, we can't be looking at a declining asset at quarterback, whichever way they go in Las Vegas. There needs to be some hope and some talent there. Short of hiring a really fantastic Shanahan, O'Connell tree type of offensive mind at head coach, do I think this is the place that Sam Darnold, if he were to be let go, would succeed? I'm not sure. But that at least is someone with a trajectory pointing up, not another veteran quarterback, the Jimmy Garoppolo's of the world, the Gardner Minshew's of the world. And if he's still playing football, the Aaron Rodgers of the world. For me, that is the last thing I'd want to see a team like the Las Vegas Raiders do at this position that is hanging over them like an albatross.
Well, Oz, the problem is just in this draft, it's not like last year when there were, at this time, 4 to 6 guys who you said could lead an NFL team within a season or two. And I think, we're going to talk popular demand in a second. The overs hit. I mean, Bo Nix was the most questioned of those, and he's proven himself very capable in the last 10 weeks. Michael Penix, even in his last start, showed some arm talent that's excellent, some accuracy concerns, some footwork concerns, perhaps to work out. But man, he has the natural talent there. And JJ McCarthy is the only one we haven't seen anything for. And his is only by basis of injury. From what we saw in the preseason, he seemed as ready as anybody. We were very excited about what we saw there. This next draft class doesn't project that way. There are 2 guys at the very top, Cam Ward, Shedeur Sanders, who we think have that potential. And then it's a steep drop-off. And unfortunately for the Raiders, they're on the wrong side of that drop-off. And so the options are what? Do what you've done the last couple of years, take a 4th-round flyer and hope it works. Aiden O'Connell looks like an NFL player, but not a starter. I think you hope to find the next Baker Mayfield, Sam Darnold situation, which might be Sam Darnold, if the Vikings decide to make that their move and stick with McCarthy. But there's talk potentially. I mean, it's being thrown out there. Would the Vikings consider moving on from McCarthy for an adequate draft package? But I think the Vikings are very happy with the scenario they've created, as complicated as it might be, that they look at what Green Bay did and had Aaron Rodgers to Jordan Love be a seamless baton pass. Can they recreate that with their own team? And I think those are the ones that are going to be out there. But there are fewer than, it's a game of musical chairs. There are 32 teams. There are not 32 guys who are worthy of starting on a team throughout the season. The Raiders, unfortunately, look like they're going to be the odd man out again.
They do. While we're on the Raiders, we have a little double shot here on the head coaching landing spots. One of the things we ask people to send in their spicy ones. This one does come from friend of the show, Brad Bolt. We've got the New York Jets, Mike McCarthy, and a late entry for the Las Vegas Raiders, Pete Carroll, back in the picture. Phil, how would you feel, getting your feelings here, how would you feel about someone like Pete Carroll coming out of pseudo retirement? That's how it's pronounced, I believe, authentically. No, coming out of pseudo retirement and taking over a team, familiar over there on the west side of things. I know it's not the West Coast, but it's towards that part of the country. Taking over a Las Vegas Raiders team that certainly, I mean, big culture guy, known for instilling that from the top down. Someone like Pete Carroll, could he reinvigorate a pretty moribund standing for the Las Vegas Raiders?
As a Broncos fan, I love it. That's it. I mean, Tom Brady is going to have a say in this coaching search. I don't think he's taking somebody on the other side of 70. He's looking for somebody who you want stability. Best case for Pete Carroll. He's there for 5 years, tops. I mean, just with his age. So you want somebody who you can find the next Mike Tomlin and have them be, you're going to lead our team for 15 to 20 years. That's the win. That's the Patriot way. He's going to try to bring that to Vegas. I think he's looking for somebody, proven or not, who he thinks can do it for the next 10 years.
Fair enough. On the other side of that, I'm going to go with the Mike McCarthy, the Jets thing. You can see how much the noise of being a Cowboys head coach has weighed on Mike McCarthy, a Midwest guy with his Pittsburgh roots, who had succeeded in the smallest market team in the NFL with the Green Bay Packers. If I was comparing and looking for the most similar franchise in terms of noise, problematic or a interfering owner with questionable decision making, and a media marketplace that is going to just hound from Dallas, the Jets would be right along there in terms of the most comparable scenarios there. So going to the Jets doesn't make a ton of sense. I would say, I don't know that I love the fit, but you can see why people are. I mean, obviously, you can see why people are drawing the line to the Chicago Bears. They've requested the permission. They have not been granted it by the Cowboys yet.
24 hours. I thought they haven't been granted. They've gotten no response. They're left on red.
There you go. Not even a response there from the Cowboys about permission to interview Mike McCarthy. But you can see from a culture standpoint for the city, a football city, the type of fabric of that franchise, storied, mean potatoes, football, hard-nosed 85 Bears, all that kind of stuff, how that would fit a little more with what we see from Mike McCarthy than the glitz, the glamour, perhaps the lack of substance that is associated with those other two franchises. And Phil, that will do it for a Hot Take Hotline Coaching Carousel edition as we make our way towards the postseason and a lot of these teams start looking more importantly to the offseason and who's going to shape theirs going forward.
Well, Laws, that'll do it for this edition of the NFL Brekkie Show. We will see you same time, same place next week, as at that point, the divisional round will be upon us. Lions and Chiefs re-enter the fray, and we will see all together this weekend which teams can get there, if our dark horses emerge or if our favorites hold serve. For Laurie Horesh, I'm Phil Murphy. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you next week.